it or not, there was actually a sizable gap in Sega's company mascot routine from the time when they dropped Alex Kidd as their mascot and adopted Sonic the Hedgehog. In between the time where they dropped Alex and the contest that would eventually spawn the spiky-headed hedgehog, they instead experimented in a much different way when looking for a mascot during the 90s. They just made a bunch of games, put them out there in the hopes that one of the characters would stick. I'm not making this up, that's genuinely how they decided at first to go about finding their new mascot. One of the characters that came out of this was Greendog, the beached surfer dude. A totally bodacious dude that is completely indicative of the era he was made in. Yes, this tall, lanky humanoid with no face was actually in the running to be Sega's mascot during the early 90s. As you can tell by the fact that he only had one game and most of you probably don't even remember him, in fact I'm not even sure Sega remembers him, that didn't exactly work out. But how does his game actually hold up after all these years? The story of Greendog is pretty friggin' deep. You see, Greendog is a typical surf bum. He goes all over the world and doesn't care for much other than surfing, inline skating, and just being a totally radical dude out for some bodacious babes. Ugh, that's not gonna get annoying at all now, is it? Until one day, while surfing off the coast of some South American country, he's accidentally knocked off his board by a freak wave and awakens on an unknown beach wearing a medallion of what the game says is Aztec origin, but I expect that this game's representation of Aztec culture is going to be along the same lines of Disney's interpretation of Native American culture in Pocahontas. Anyway, after taking a few moments to recover, Greendog discovers that he can't remove the medallion. Then all of a sudden, a red bikini-clad wearing chick shows up and tells him that the medallion is cursed. Who is this woman? What significance does she have? Why does she know about the medallion? And why does she just appear out of thin air? It's never explained. But anyway, she explains that the medallion's curse not only makes it so that wild animals and most people will attack Greendog on sight, but much worse than that, it prevents him from surfing! He can still go in the water, but he can't surf, which is like the worst thing in the world to him. He can still skate and stuff, it's just specifically surfing. Who knew the ancient Aztecs hated surfboards so much? Of course, Greendog is not going to take this lying down, and the babe manages to reveal to him that if he can find all the hidden Aztec treasures that were apparently scattered to ruins all across the world, he can reverse the curse, remove the medallion, and get back to doing what he loves. See, I told you the story was pretty deep, didn't I? I'm actually not going to fault the story too much here because, again, this was an early Genesis title and it was around the time when people still weren't clamoring for high art in storytelling when it came to video games. In fact, the most complex games that you usually got were ones that were so complicated most people couldn't even follow them. It's actually a pretty cute time capsule of the time it was made, too, so that's also a plus. Anyway, moving on from the story to the gameplay aspect. The game is played like a very basic linear platformer. You try to get from one end of the level to the other while not dying, and that's basically all it is. What mixes this up, though, is that there are several different variations on the stages. Most of the first stages in each of the worlds has you just going from point A to point B, while the second one is played in an Aztec ruin that is a bit more maze-like, or occasionally has you inline skating or skateboarding through a bunch of hazards to reach the end. Once you reach the end of the Aztec maze, you have to fight a randomly generated tiki boss, which is honestly kind of disappointing because while the boss is randomly generated, it just determines which 4 heads are going to be stacked on top of each other, and you really don't need any strategy to beat them, you just need to keep wailing on them until they disappear. And then after that, you get a bonus stage involving you flying around in a gyrocopter to get to the next level. Of course, this is complicated by the fact that yes, indeed, everything is trying to kill you. Plants, animals, inanimate objects, tourists with annoyingly large flashing cameras, the works They're all coming after you just because you're wearing a medallion that you didn't want in the first place. Did I mention yet how deep I think the story is? Because it's pretty deep. Now, of course, you have a weapon to assist you on your perilous journey throughout the world, and that weapon is your antique frisbee. I'm not making this up. The frisbee apparently has magical boomerang properties because every time you throw it, it will automatically return to you. It's actually a pretty cool concept, but utterly ridiculous. You can also gather several different items throughout your journey as well that will do such things as stopping time for the enemies, allowing you to have a hovering frisbee that will attack anything next to you, and of course the basic health restoration items. It's pretty helpful, but also pretty standard. And that's one of the main disappointments of the game, is that it's just pretty standard. It's average, there's not a whole lot to it as a basic platformer. The controls are nice and fluid at least, all of them feel very responsive, and Greendog moves pretty well. In fact, his animation as such a large sprite is pretty funny to look at, especially with how cartoonishly he's designed. Jumping feels a little bit weird though. It's hard to explain, but it's mostly because you just have so much hang time when you jump in the air. And it's a little bit wonky to get used to, but it's not a game breaker by any stretch of the imagination. It still works well, and despite this being a platformer, there aren't a lot of precision jumps that you have to make, surprisingly. Except for levels with inline skating. I'll talk about that in a second. One of the main problems with the game is that it moves at a very leisurely pace, which makes sense. Greendog is portrayed as a very laid-back, bodacious dude who just goes with the flow, man. Oh my god, I've got to stop myself. But one of the main problems with that is the fact that, well, he's so laid back that he doesn't really feel the need to hurry. As such, he moves relatively slowly across the screen, which again comes back to the fact that your jump just feels so slow. He attacks fast enough, so you're never in any real danger of the enemies, so long as you get your frisbee out there and can aim it properly, but you don't really have any ability to dodge incoming attacks or speed yourself up. In fact, the only stages where you start to move pretty fast, and the only stages in the game that really show off the capabilities of speedy processing by the Genesis, are games that require you to be on a skateboard or inline skates. And these are easily the worst ones in the game because the physics just feel kind of off. Now again, this is a very early Genesis title, and it came out before Sonic the Hedgehog, so Sega was still experimenting with what their new console was capable of. So again, it's something that I really can't hold against the game just because of when it came out. But again, that also just adds to the fact that it feels like a very average platformer. Moving on from the controls and the gameplay, I will say that the graphics are actually very appealing. Most of the time. A majority of the game takes place both in outdoor stages and indoor stages. The indoor stages are all Aztec temples, and that's where the graphics really hit their low point because they all look the same. They all reuse the exact same assets and the exact same sprites and look. So, since 50% of the game is taking place in these ruins, it gets very tiresome to look at very quickly. The outdoor stages, on the other hand, are actually really nice to look at and really show off what those 16 bits are capable of. In terms of the characters, I've already mentioned how I enjoy Greendog's cartoonish animations, and while he does move slow, the larger sprite does give a lot of great detail to his movement. I mean, come on, look at that walk cycle. That's so goofy! Oh, I love it. Okay, so going on to the enemies, they are also pretty well animated and well designed, if a little bit simpler than Greendog himself. Still, I like how bright and vibrant most of them are, I really enjoy how they move, and I really enjoy their reactions to seeing Greendog. In fact, once again, the only big disappointment here are the bosses. Not only are they incredibly easy to beat, just being giant stacks of tiki heads, but most of their animation is relatively limited to just opening their mouths and spitting whatever their attack is at you. Still, for as average as I have called this game so far, the one big thing that I can praise about it is definitely its Calypso soundtrack. It has a really great and unique sound, especially, once again, for an early Genesis title, and I would highly recommend tracking down a few of the instrumental tunes from the outdoor sections and just listening to them casually. Again, it's a down point when you get to the Aztec temples because they all pretty much use the exact same MIDI track, and most of them are very low-key and downbeat, which really kind of sours the atmosphere. The game actually has a lot of really good atmosphere, as I've pointed out. It's bright, it's vibrant in places, and it's a fun little game, but it doesn't have a lot of staying power. It's also pretty short, and you can beat it in under 2 hours, even if you haven't really played it before. It's just that simple of a game. But what makes it even worse is that the game isn't even really a complete story. Now again, I mentioned about the fact that the story is completely inconsequential and completely ridiculous to boot, but at the same time, if you're going to give a character a game, you should still have him go through a complete story. But that doesn't happen here. Instead, Greendog finds all the pieces of the treasure and starts flying away with his gyrocopter, only for a disembodied narrator to tell us, the audience, that he is the ambiguous chosen one, and that this is only the start of his adventures. As I pointed out during the beginning of this review, this was his only adventure. And it's kind of difficult to not see why. Greendog is a fun game. I want to make that point very clear. But it's not a very engaging game. It's fun in short bursts, and it's pretty good for what it is, which is an early Genesis platformer before Sonic the Hedgehog came and redefined what a platformer could do on the Genesis. Here though, it's slow, it's short, and while it might be fun to play for short bursts, it's not exactly the kind of thing that you're going to come back to time and again. Greendog was rightfully forgotten as a relic of the early 90s, and unfortunately, well, there's not a whole much more to say about him. Other than the fact that he is totally radical and bodacious and I'm jerking on my 90s. Hey, I just wanted to thank you guys for watching my video. Now, if you could do me one more favor and go to the Overshield's YouTube account and subscribe there, you could watch my videos, and other people's videos, all the dang time and have a great time. They've got reviews, previews, interviews, let's plays, all the things that gamers like to watch on places like this. So go and check them out. I know you won't be disappointed. So thanks a lot, and I'll see you all on the next video.